A noseum inference, sometimes spelled noseum, tiny biting midges, which are so small they are nearly invisible to the naked eye, is a form of argument that infers the absence of something from the fact that we cannot see it. It is a type of non-deductive reasoning, often linked to skeptical theism, and the problem of evil, which suggests that if we cannot see an outweighing good, a reason for God to allow evil, then there probably is no such good. Key aspects of the noseum inference in philosophy include core principle. It is often summarized as if we can't see they ain't there. The problem of evil. It is commonly used in arguments against theism. If there is no discernible reason for a specific instance of suffering, the inference argues that there is no good reason for it, concluding that an omnipotent, benevolent God does not exist. Skeptical theism challenge. Skeptical theists challenge this, arguing that due to cognitive limitations, humans should not expect to see all the reasons God might have for allowing evil, making noseum inferences unreliable. No-see value. It is sometimes applied outside of theology, such as arguing that because someone cannot see the value in a particular area, like philosophy, they conclude it has no value. The term is often used critically to highlight the flaws in relying on limited human perception to draw universal conclusions. The motivation for the noseum inference depends on whether you are using it to argue against theism or analyzing it as a skeptical response. 1. Motivation for the argument. The atheist skeptic. The primary driver for using this inference is to solve the evidential problem of evil. Intuitive plausibility. It is naturally appealing to assume that if an all-good, all-knowing God existed, any reason for suffering would be something humans could eventually understand. Empirical basis. It relies on inscrutable evil-horrific events for which we simply cannot imagine a justifying reason. Logical simplification. It turns a massive metaphysical question into a simpler inductive sampling problem. We've looked for a reason and found none. Therefore, there probably isn't one. 2. Motivation for the critique. The skeptical theist. Philosophers like Stephen Wickstrait use the noseum label to highlight the hidden assumptions in that reasoning. Exposing cognitive limitations. The goal is to show that humans are often in a poor position to see the whole picture. Just as a child cannot understand why a parent lets a doctor give them a painful shot, humans might not understand God's complex moral depth. Undercutting evidence. By labeling the inference noseum, they argue that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence in cases where we wouldn't expect to see the evidence anyway, like tiny bugs in a tent. Defensive strategy. It allows theists to remain agnostic about why specific evils happen without having to provide a full explanation, theodicy, for every tragedy. Noseum inference is essentially a specific, more sophisticated version of an argument from ignorance. While both reason from a lack of evidence, the noseum inference adds a critical condition, the expectation that you should be able to see the evidence if it were there. Why the noseum is more specific. The noseum argument is more nuanced because it relies on epistemic access, the ability to actually perceive what you are looking for. The expectation factor. In an argument from ignorance, you simply lack proof. In a noseum inference, you argue that because you've looked and found nothing, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Legitimacy. An argument from ignorance is usually seen as hasty conclusion jumping or shifting the burden of proof. A noseum inference is considered legitimate if the thing you're looking for is large and obvious, like a tractor trailer on a field, but illegitimate if it's tiny and hidden, like grass mites or a complex divine reason. In philosophy, the term was created to pinpoint exactly where a skeptic's reasoning might be failing. They aren't just being ignorant, they are making a specific noseum assumption hat. They have the cognitive power to see a reason if one existed. It's essentially saying, in my experience, if a reason existed for this, it would look like X. I've scanned the situation, I don't see X, and since my vision is usually reliable for things this size, I conclude there is no reason. The philosophical friction happens at the prior understanding part. The skeptics bet, our prior understanding of morality and logic is a wide-angle lens. If there were a good reason for a child to suffer, that reason should be big enough for us to spot. The skeptical theists counter, our prior understanding is actually a narrow pinhole. We are analyzing a four-dimensional chess move, God's plan, with 2D vision. So, while an argument from ignorance is just I don't know, therefore it's not, the noseum inference is I've checked my mental map of how the world works, and this doesn't fit, so it's likely false. It's an attempt to turn I don't see it into active evidence. Instead of seeing the noseum as a definitive logical trap, we could look at it as a diagnostic tool for checking our own perspective. When someone says I don't see a reason for this, it opens up a great opportunity to consider the context and environment that shape that view. Here are a few positive ways to position that lack of exposure idea. 1. Identifying the field of vision. One way to look at this is that our no-see isn't necessarily a failure of logic, but a reflection of our current vantage point. If a specific group of people all come to the same noseum conclusion, it might simply suggest they are all standing on the same hill. Moving to a different hill, be engaging with different cultures, disciplines, or lived experiences, might reveal something that was previously hidden. 2. Encouraging epistemic humility. This perspective invites a healthy kind of humility. Instead of assuming I can't see it, so it's not there, a person might say, I don't see it from here. This turns a closed conclusion into an open invitation to seek out diverse categories of thinkers. Acknowledge that our prior experiences act like a lens that filters what we perceive. Value the vision of others who might be standing in a different spot. 3. A catalyst for growth. When we realize our noseum might be due to a lack of exposure, it actually becomes a positive motivator. It suggests that the missing reason isn't necessarily non-existent or a divine mystery, but perhaps something we just haven't been introduced to yet. It shifts the focus from a dead-end argument to a journey of discovery. 4. Refining the inference. By considering who we are around, we can actually make our reasoning stronger. If we look for a reason across many different categories of individuals and still don't see one, our conclusion becomes much more robust. It moves the inference from a hasty glance to a comprehensive search. In this light, the no-seeum inference isn't just about what is there or not there, it's a reflection of our willingness to look around. That shifts the burden of proof in a really interesting way. Instead of just saying I don't see a reason, the individual is invited to explain the origin of that no-see. It suggests that if your perception is shared by everyone in your specific category or circle, then the thing you actually need to defend isn't the conclusion, but the validity of the experience that led you there. This turns the no-seeum from a simple intuition into a situated perspective that requires its own defense. Defending the lens. If you claim a reason doesn't exist, you are also implicitly defending your own background, education, and social exposure as a sufficiently clear window to make that call. Indexing to origin. You're highlighting that our no-sees are often indexed to our starting point. If my origin, culture, era, or social class hasn't exposed me to certain concepts, my no-seeum is more a map of my own history than a map of objective reality. From intuition to evidence. By asking why a group shares a perception, you move away from it just feels true toward an investigation of shared experiential data. You have to justify why your collective experience is the right one for spotting the truth in this specific case. In this light, a no-seeum isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card for an argument. It's actually a starting point for a much deeper conversation about how our life stories and social circles shape what we consider plausible or visible. Pointing out that without a meta-review of how you and your peers reached that conclusion, the no-seeum inference remains surface level. If a group's shared intuition is just a byproduct of the same limited exposure, then the no-see isn't a discovery, it's just a unanimous blind spot. To make the inference supported, an individual has to do the heavy lifting of auditing the intuition, asking if the reason they can't see is truly absent, or if it's just incompatible with the specific mental map their social or academic circle uses. Accounting for compatibility. Recognizing that if 5 people no-see the same thing for the same reason, you don't have 5 pieces of evidence. You have 1 perspective multiplied by 5 double counting charge. Investigating the why. Explaining why those specific individuals share that perception. If the common thread is just a shared origin or lack of outside exposure, the no-seeum loses its status as a logical proof and becomes a biographical fact about the group. In short, a no-seeum that hasn't examined its own fundamental basis is essentially an unexamined life in logical form. It claims to be an observation of the world, but it's actually just an observation of the observer's own limitations. Take this scenario: how valuable is playing basketball? The person is making a no-seeum inference based on a technical understanding of the facts, the ball, the hoop, the dribbling, while missing the internal experience, the flow, the competition, the satisfaction of a good shot. Whether they are justified depends on what they are actually claiming. 1. The distinction of value. The unjustified inference. If the person says, basketball has no objective value or meaning, they are likely unjustified. Their no-see is a direct result of their lack of exposure to the experience. They are judging the essence of a thing by looking only at its mechanics. The justified personal preference. If they say, I see no reason for me to play basketball, they are on firmer ground. They are reporting their own lack of interest. However, even then, a critic could argue they don't truly know their own interest until they've actually stepped on the court. 2. The category of individual's effect. The basketball example illustrates the earlier point about social circles. If this person is surrounded by other people who also don't play sports, their no-seeum basketball is stupid will be constantly reinforced. Because they all share the same lack of exposure, they create a bubble where the stupidity of basketball feels like an obvious, shared truth. They mistake their collective lack of experience for a collective insight into the nature of the game. 3. Fundamental basis of understanding. As noted, if they haven't done the work to review why they feel this way, it remains an unsupported no-seeum. To make it supported, they would need to ask, is my no-see based on the game itself, or is it indexed to my origin as someone who has never been pushed to value physical competition? Without that self-audit, they are essentially saying, I don't see the point, because I've never looked for it from the inside. In philosophy, this is a major critique of skeptics who dismiss religious or aesthetic experiences. If you only look at the mechanics of a ritual or a poem without entering the game, your no-seeum might just be a report on your own outsider status. Does this make the no-seeum inference feel like it's often just a placeholder for a lack of personal engagement? Using the no-seeum inference as a defense for a pro-life position follows a specific logical track. It argues that because we no-see a sufficient moral reason that would justify ending a biological human life, we should conclude that no such reason exists. Here is how that no-see works as a moral argument, while applying the perspective checks we discussed. 1. The core inference. No-see a justification. A person using this logic might argue, the observation, I have looked at the various reasons given for abortion, financial hardship, timing, autonomy, and I cannot see any reason that outweighs the value of a developing human life. The conclusion. Therefore, there is no morally sufficient reason to end that life. In this case, the no-seeum isn't about seeing a physical object, but about the invisibility of a justifying value. 2. The cognitive scanning defense. The individual is essentially claiming they have performed a mental scan of the moral landscape. They find the pro-choice reasons to be small or invisible when placed next to the large and visible fact of a human life. The logic. If a valid reason existed to end this life, it should be obvious and overwhelming. Since I don't see one that meets that criteria, it must not exist. 3. The challenge of category of individuals. As we discussed, the strength of this no-see depends on the exposure of the person making it. The social circle. If the individual is surrounded only by people with a shared religious or traditional origin, their no-see might be a result of their environment rather than a universal truth. The counter-audit. A critic might ask, do you no-see a reason because there isn't one? or because your social category has trained you to look past the lived experiences, health risks, poverty, lack of support, that others see as valid reasons for. Is it a supported nauseam? To make this a supported inference rather than just an intuition, the individual has to do the work we mentioned earlier. Reviewing the basis, they must investigate the compatible ideas of others. If they only understand the mechanics of the pro-choice argument, like the basketball observer, without understanding the internal weight of those reasons for the people experiencing them, their no-see is arguably unsupported. Defending the lens, they are not just defending a fetus, they are defending their own experiential history as the correct way to view the world. Summary. Using nauseam logic for a pro-life stance turns the argument into a claim about moral visibility. It says, I've looked for a good enough reason to do this, and I find the cupboard of reasons empty. The debate then shifts to whether the cupboard is truly empty, or if the person is simply looking at the wrong shelf. One might need to check if truth-conducive process the person used to reach their conclusion isn't actually designed to find the truth. It's designed to protect a personal narrative or an emotional bias. The ex-girlfriend problem, emotional indexing. In the basketball example, the person's no-see is indexed to their trauma or resentment. The claim, I see no reason to play basketball, it's a pointless game. The reality, they aren't actually looking at the game of basketball. They are looking at a no-see shaped by a specific person, the ex. The result, their no-see is apparent to everyone else as a personal bias. It's a truth about their feelings, but it's not a truth about basketball. Applying this to ethos, if someone's ethos, their character or credibility is tied to a specific category of individuals, or a personal history of conflict, their nauseam inference becomes highly suspicious. If you know someone was raised in a strictly anti-choice environment, and they say I see no reason to be pro-choice, their no-see feels predetermined, because the conclusion was reached before the investigation even started. It's not an inference at all. It's a resection, a cutting away of any evidence that doesn't fit their history. The apparent blind spot. Often, the person making the nauseam inference is the only one who doesn't see the bias. The subject thinks they are making an objective observation about the world. Basketball is stupid. The observer sees the origin story behind the thought. You just hate it because of your ex. This turns the nauseam inference into a defense of experiential history. If they haven't done the work to separate their origin from their observation, they aren't defending a truth. They are just defending their own lived experience as if it were a universal law. Does this mean that for a no-see to be taken seriously, the person must first confess their biases to show they've tried to look past them? What does it mean to accurately weigh reasons?